Let's look at Continental Divide. This is another choo-choo game, a winsome one in this case, which is reprinted, I assume. May have been designed initially for Eagle Griffin, which means, you know, nicer components, bigger price tag, whatever. I kind of feel like I should gravitate towards the better component winsomes. I have a few of the not so good component ones. I tend not to play them as quickly. There's just a certain pleasure to decent components. This one's kind of interesting. Stock value doesn't move, and cash isn't your victory condition. Everything doesn't get converted into money. Your victory conditions have more to do with building westward, really, across the divide. Not a lot of rules. Most of these don't. Some somewhat familiar mechanisms to the winsome designs, but there's enough difference here that it may explain a couple of things. One of which is that it has kind of a lower rating than a lot of the winsomes do, because it's not meeting the expectations of what a winsome game kind of allows you to. Now, we'll see whether or not it plays out in a way that's still enjoyable. Remember, I'm not terribly wedded to that winsome design philosophy across the board, but this seems to capture most of that design philosophy, but with some significant differences in terms of what it has. And, you know, will it, I don't know. I don't know what the, you know, whether the money not being the victory condition, as it were, is going to make a lot of sense to me, but it's okay. There are people who don't have money as their primary goal in life, right? And I'm often railing about how we kind of equate everything to money. It's kind of neat to have a game in a competitive economic type situation where that's not the primary goal. So I've set it up, 6 players. I want to be able to explore, you know, more opportunities. However, I'm always worried that I don't think differently enough from myself to really do that. And notice no glare, because, you know, it's not a glossy board. Glare off the rule book though. Glossy rules, but there aren't many of them, so it should be pretty easy. I've set up, initially you deal out the turn order cards. See no reason for that. My players aren't differentiated, so for the first turn, the turn order cards are going to be in my happy space with a counterclockwise rotation. On each player turn, you're going to be able to do 2 things. Buy a share of railroad stock and build some track. Wow. No action selection, nothing like that. No, there's no auctioning in this one either. Then after each player has their turn, dividends are going to get paid out so that we have money to keep doing stuff. The game may end, which is just a matter of time. It's not really a big deal. After 8 turns it ends. And then you determine the new play order. Okay. So when you buy railroad stock, well, you're allowed to buy more than one stock, more than one share. You're not allowed to buy more than one corporation's stock. If you want to start a new corporation, you pick which city it starts in, which is Chicago, Memphis, or New Orleans. The big cities on the end of the map. You put one of your cubes from the left side of the company there in one of the 3 hexes of that city. You take another cube and you put it on the railroad income for 0. You have 16 cubes to start with, so now you're down to 14, and we'll drop that down to 13 because you'll pick another one for the income, or I'm sorry, for the stock value. But you decide how many shares you want to issue. Anywhere between 3 and 10. If you issue, that's going to be how much money the corporation has, to operate throughout the game, basically. It's going to be based on the number of shares. But on the other hand, selling out all the shares is a victory point bonus. Any extra shares are just removed from the game. You get one of the shares, you get the cube, and put it on the issued shares track. That's going to be this issued stock to indicate how many shares there are total. That's going to be kind of important. And then you decide your stock value for starting, which is going to run anywhere between 10 and 50. Each company can only sit on one. Each value can only have one company associated with it. And that's not going to move. You leave the unsold stock in the certificates area. You'll have 12 cubes to play with to build westward. And you have 10 cubes available to you when you cross into the central and then the western portions of the map. Central and western. And this, I guess, is the Continental Divide here, the black line. Okay. The minimum cost, and you have to pay, I assume. I'm looking for this. It doesn't actually say that I can see. That is my assumption. But it may just be that you can float it at 0. I'm going to have to, you don't pay any money for your first share. Let's see how this is worded again. It says buying. A lot of detail, a lot of words, which makes it harder to find, without a lot of... You place that much money with the stocks. I assume that's out of your own pocket. Because otherwise you'd start them as high as you could. Okay. If a railroad already exists, you could instead buy shares of that railroad. And that can be one or more shares of it. You pay that money to the company treasury. The minimum cost is going to be the stock value of that railroad, plus whatever dividend would be paid at that moment, whatever its income is at that time. So the price that you pay for shares does actually increase over the game. It's still a fixed price. There's no auction in play. You may pay more than the minimum cost, and you can buy more than one share of the company, which is something people have to keep in mind. Everybody's got $40. If you start a company at, say, 20 with 3 shares, you get 1 share for 20. Somebody else can buy the other 2 shares for their $40. And now they have, a larger holding. That may not be a problem. We'll see why in a moment. So building track. You can build track for one or more railroads. You must be the majority shareholder, have the most shares in that railroad, or be tied for that. You take cubes from the railroad collection and put them in hexes to show that the railroad has built track in that hex. The track must connect back to your starting city, and each railroad can only have 1 cube in a hex. The hex is going to have 2 numbers on it: the cost to build and the income that's going to get incremented as you build each hex. Every hex has both of these values on it, and you'll see a lot of them have fair incomes, and there's good proportions on it. The track built during your turn must be placed in an unbroken straight line beginning at an existing built hex. Now, this is a little weird as a statement. I'm assuming that's on a per company basis. Because you're allowed to build for one or more railroads. Well, that's going to be hard to do on that straight line track situation. So again, I'm assuming that that's there, and it's just not stated. Again, it's very sparse rules, but with blocks of text. You can build track from the hex, and the track built in the player's turn must be built in a straight line from that hex. No more than 3 railroads can be in a single hex. There's no artificial limit to how much track you can have your railroad build, and I assume that's on a given turn even. The only limiting factors are how many cubes you have and how much cash you have. The railroad pays to build the track. The starting cities, a railroad can only occupy a single hex of any of the starting cities, and they provide no income. And you can't build into them, they don't have a cost. Port cities are San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Diego, and Los Angeles down here. They're not particularly marked in any special way. You just have to kind of remember them. It would be nice if they were a little different color or something. These give you a transcontinental connection if you can hook up to them. You may only occupy a single port city, and they can only hold one railroad. The division, Eastern, Central, and Western region, which are the red lines on the board, I guess. You begin in the Eastern region. You have 12 cubes for building track. Once you enter the Central region, you get 10 more cubes, which you can keep using immediately as you cross, if you have enough money. If you build into the Western, you get 10 more cubes, which you can keep using. The Continental Divide, once you cross the Continental Divide, and I don't know what's up here. It doesn't look like there's any black here. It looks like there's spaces where the Continental Divide doesn't really happen. Like here, I'm assuming here and here it happens, and that these it happens, but I'm not positive. Once you cross the Continental Divide, your income increases by $10. So the restrictions on laying track: 3 railroads in a hex. 1 railroad is the maximum allowed in any given port city, which wasn't stated before, I don't think. Oh yeah, it was. Neat. Only 1 starting city hex for each railroad. Only 1 port city hex for each railroad. And you may only build track from an existing hex in a straight line. That's on a per player turn basis, as far as I can tell. After everybody players had their turn, it's time to pay dividends. Dividends are going to be based on the railroad income. It will pay out what it has to its shareholders and keep any remainder. You divide the current railroad income by the number of total shares. That's including the shares that the railroad holds. This amount is paid from the bank to the shareholders for each share of the railroad that they have. If that total railroad income is not exceeded, the excess money goes into the railroad treasury. Now, it may be the case, however, that all shares are held by the players, and because of the rounding rules, you always round up, you're going to end up paying out more than the railroad's income. The railroad won't get any additional money from this, but the players will. And it's also possible the railroad won't get what it seems to be due, because it's the rounding up rule. And the way the rounding up rule works is you divide the total income by the total number of shares outstanding. That's the value you get if you round it up for each share. So you don't even, like, having 2 shares of something that gets a half each, say, doesn't get you just one, it gets you $2. The game ends at the end of turn 8. You move the choo-choo forward. So the player order is going to change by the person who went last on the last turn choosing where they want to go in the next turn. They just pick a player order card that they want to use. If last is a good place to be, which I don't think it is because you're kind of racing to get to locations. If last is a good place to be, then you would want to keep it all game and it would be easy to do. But I suspect that going early is usually the bigger advantage. Okay, so then at the end of the game, you figure out victory points. And each share of stock is going to be worth victory points. One for entering the central region, one for entering the western region. 2 if you cross the Continental Divide. You know, honestly, I think you could sneak in here without crossing the Continental Divide. That's what I think it means. And not get those victory points and not get the extra money. You get 1 point for hitting a port city, unless it's San Francisco, in which case it's worth 2 points. And if you have no unsold stock remaining, i.e. if somebody's bought up every, well, if the players collectively have bought up every share of the stock that was available, that's worth an additional victory point. So those are your goals, is get across the map to one of the port cities, preferably San Francisco, but only one person is going to get that. Sell the company out, and these other steps you're largely going to make on the way across. All right, I'm going to look to make sure there's no errata on this because I'm left with a few questions, but I can do it with those questions outstanding in my head. They don't bother me that much. So let's load this up and get started.